All righty. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to this Analyst Associates Board interview series. Today we have Katherine Hatter, who is currently the head of finance and accounting at Clarity Partners, has been there for 5 or so years. And first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to sit here with me today on this Friday evening. I know weekend plans kind of have to be put on hold for this. But I first want to just start off by tell us a little bit about you, with your work history, where you're at now, how you got there, just overall in general.
Sure. So my undergrad was accounting and finance. I took the CPA exam, so did that too. I ultimately also kind of threw in going back to school to get my MBA at Chicago Booth, and I got 4 different concentrations there. So I feel like life has always been busy professionally, even beyond my job. I've also done a lot of volunteering using some of my professional skills as well with Taproot Foundation. I did a few projects with them, strategy, human capital, finance. So I feel like my background has come into play in many areas of my life, both, like I said, in my current job and just across the course of my career.
Gotcha. I was actually looking at MBA programs earlier, and Booth was one of them that came up. So I might have to ask you some other time. Thank you for that. Now, what is one piece of advice, or if you have a couple, what are a couple pieces of advice that you would give to all young professionals, kind of like recently graduating college? You can either be in general or just entering in public accounting.
Okay. Yeah, I think the public accounting is a common one. I went with an open mind. I didn't have a timeline, but I think the general guidance I would give people is, if it's not for you, don't feel like you have to stay like a super long time. A couple of years is great because in those couple of years, you see big clients, small clients, different industries, and that's pretty much, I think, the most valuable part of the experience if you decide it's not for you. And even someone with as much experience at this point that I have, it's one of those things that you can never take it off your resume as much as you want to because people find it so valuable. So even though I was only in that world for a couple of years, it kind of carries and stays with you for your entire career, something that's very valued.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so you started in audit, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And you started in audit and then moved on to, audit consulting. And then you moved on LinkedIn, I saw it was FP&A, but could be kind of consulting as well. And then multiple consulting roles. So how would you say, how are you able to make all those pivots in your career? Kind of like a mindset, but also, I guess, physically or academically, how are you able to do that? Especially because you have a life too. And what would you say to someone who is thinking about maybe switching career paths or even just switching emphases?
Sure. I mean, I think it's fun to always explore different industries, different organizations, because different people have different organizations have different cultures. So I think it's fun over the course of one's career to be as open-minded and exploratory to new ideas and situations as possible. So for me, when I determined that, of course, public accounting wasn't where I wanted to stay long-term, mainly because I just wanted to feel like I was adding more value. And I really liked kind of learning about the business more so than checking a lot of boxes. I basically kind of prioritize Baxter Healthcare. Main reason is because when I was doing recruiting in undergrad, I knew they had a really, really, really good finance program. So I found a recruiter that was looking to fill some roles there, and it's through him that I got to Baxter, which was great. So I went from public accounting to a $2 billion FP&A role. That was a global role. So that's a really big bucket of business to do financial planning for. And that was great. I got exposure to, the basics of a publicly traded company, financial planning, and I got kind of invited to take on some extra projects beyond what my initial job was. And that's one of my words of advice for people. When you're younger in your career, anything that you can do beyond your obvious job description either if it's something that you find as an opportunity or someone asks you to do. I think it's like compounding investments because, shoot, my light went off. Sorry, okay. Damn it. So that's going to have to be edited.
That's all right.
I was like, I have no response for that. Okay. So going back to Baxter, I think it's really important to find opportunities to invest in your career, especially when you're younger, because I see it almost like compounding interest, that you get so many long-term benefits from not just working like those 40 hours and doing like the basics of what you're asked to do, but taking on like, oh, this extra project that, oh, it's going to be an extra 20 hours this week for me to like get this done. And maybe not the most convenient hours that you want to work, but you learn so much from those extra opportunities and you get extra items on your resume that your peers aren't getting. So you're basically almost getting like sometimes double the job experience that your peer is getting that chooses not to step up to those things. Another example I'll give just from Baxter is just talking about like being open. So after my first role, I was looking for a second role and we had a sales ops team as part of the US business, which maybe didn't seem like the most interesting thing initially to me. It just kind of like came up. And that actually was one of the best roles I had because it was so different than my first role at Baxter because it was like looking at SKUs, like a million levels of data on a spreadsheet and SKUs, which is way different than a $2 billion global business. And that role and thinking about how you incentivize people to sell was really helpful for me when I took a different job years later, and gave me opportunities to take on projects that the company didn't even know should be projects to position them better for achieving their goals.
Yeah, 100%. And so kind of going off of that, experiencing new roles and new problems and new solutions, that has to come up in consulting. Would you say consulting is probably a very fast track to being able to get all those experiences early on in your career?
So I think consulting is like a good opportunity, like any type of consulting you can do, where, working in public accounting was consulting, although it was audit, you see a lot of different things. Even like a lot of, once again, like Taproot, the projects I did with them were pro bono consulting projects, but I learned so much from each one of those. And even from some of those projects, even though they weren't as tightly in my wheelhouse. Like I was asked to do a strategy role for an HR project that helped me then later take on a bunch of HR activities at a couple of companies that I was at because that was one example where I learned a lot about HR outside of like an FP&A role.
Right. Perfect. And then, so moving from one career to another career, I guess the first question is, and this could be a very quick answer, has that always been something you've wanted to do? Or is it kind of more you were contacting someone who was in that role and you kind of use them as a mentor to possibly learn about it or to kind of get into it?
Well, I think a lot of the opportunities kind of came to me. So I think using the one I just used about my second role at Baxter, which was sales ops, I mean, it was an internal opportunity that like kind of came to me at some level because it was like within the company. Like it's not something I found on LinkedIn at a different company or anything like that. But to the point of, how I think about this, it was actually my second boss at Baxter who then called me. Him and I both left the company, and it was years later, he called me because his boss needed a strategy person for a new role. So once again, I wasn't looking on LinkedIn for a strategy role, but he thought of me and I ended up taking that role. So, I think it's once again showing that you're versatile, showing that you're willing to put in the work to do something that's maybe a little bit different than your last role. It's a new industry. And then, people will know that you can figure it out and make it happen.
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking right off of that. So, have you had many mentors in the past, or what would you say about mentorship in total? And then how have you personally benefited from it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've been lucky. I've had most of my bosses have been very good. Of course, even no one's perfect. And I also look at things that maybe they haven't done that weren't as great as an example of maybe what I don't want to do, right? But I have been lucky that most of the people I've worked for an extended period have been great to work for. The other thing I think about, which is kind of something that's evolved over the last 10 years, is I think of my network all the time now. When I was younger in my career, if you asked me about my network, I'd be like, I don't even know. Like, I don't think it was good. But I've really, I think, over the last 10 years, focused on building my network just because I started to find it fun. It's a good way to, like, you get to the point in your career where you're not learning as much day in and day out. So it gives you an outlet to kind of like have conversations that are different than what you have in your office, because different people are doing different things. Once again, it's always interesting to hear what they're doing. So the way I think about like mentoring and networking now is, at least from like where maybe I'm looking to benefit from something, is okay, I've got this problem, I'm facing this issue at work. Who in my network has faced this before or something similar? And then usually if I go through my LinkedIn connections, I can usually find someone or a couple people that are great people to reach out to and kind of get their take on the issue. And then of course, like, I do try to help other people that are more junior or like my peers, right? They reach out to me too and ask me questions about things. And of course, I try to be as helpful as possible. And if I don't know, I can usually, this is another good thing, is if I'm not the expert, which I'm often not, I can think of a person or two that, I can refer them to that probably has a better insight on that.
Right. And then lastly, what challenges have you faced, and what words of inspiration do you have, or advice, I guess, for future women in business in general, just business, or specifically accounting and finance?
Sure. So I think it's interesting. Like, when I started my career, I was looking at the partners at the public accounting firm I was working at, and there were some females, but very, very few. And thankfully, that's been improved. However, years after that, I've been at events that are more industry focused. I can definitely remember around like 10 years ago, I went to a tech event. And once again, you walk in the room and you feel like every person there is, not reflective of being a female. So it's just kind of a weird situation. And even like some of the finance events I've been to that are more on the investment side, you walk into the room of a private equity event and it's all a bunch of guys.
Yeah.
So those are sometimes hard situations. But even going back to the example of like a somewhat recent private equity event I went to, where it was mainly a bunch of guys, thankfully one of my friends was there. And he actually helped me out from another kind of difficult situation with someone I just met. So, you can find your male allies that, will help you. And, I have guy friends that will text me on like Women's Day and like send like me a very random encouraging message that I don't expect that, but that's like kind of cool, right?
Mhm.
So it's finding your male allies. And I've been lucky to have a lot of men, right, that have supported my work, and made, work very, I guess, rewarding, even though it's always challenging, still feel rewarding. I think the thing that I find the most important, though, to think about, and this goes for, I guess, both genders as they think about like life outside of work, is equity. So, especially I think during the pandemic, everyone's talking about how things are so out of balance. And I think part of my success, even with being able to do what I've wanted to do for the most part, at work, is because my home life with my partner is relatively balanced. Where if we've got a major project going on, we take turns. Who's the one managing this major project? Oh, okay, he managed that big last project. I'm going to manage the next one. Planning vacations, finance stuff is divided. I take care of like the big strategic decisions, and then he takes care of like the more day-to-day stuff. So I think that's really huge, because you hear people all the time complain about how they don't have enough hours in their day to focus on some of their work stuff because of things going on at home. And I really think one needs to think about kind of their partner in life to make sure that they can bring their best effort to work.
Yeah, 100%. Well, that's all the questions I have. But thank you again very much for taking the time to chat with me today. And everyone who's watching, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for future interview series coming up.